Welcome to Perpetually Exasperated, the podcast where we've chosen to read new best-selling books from both sides of the political spectrum, so you don't have to, and tell you how at times they've kind of got the right idea, but mostly how they're missing the point of why everything kind of sucks. I'm Joseph.
And I'm Joseph's increasingly annoyed drumming fingers. In this next episode, we're going to be reviewing Abundance by the New York Times' Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson of The Atlantic, a Simon & Schuster production claiming to explain that our problems today are not the results of yesteryear's villains. Rather, one generation's solutions have become the next generation's problems.
So, let's see how this keeps us perpetually exasperated, and why you should be as well.
Okay, so is this abundance? Have we abunded? Are we now abundance pilled?
No, okay, I'm gonna stop you right there and be very clear about something. Never, under any circumstances, use any of those words again, or I will do a violence on you.
Okay, fine. But I at least feel like we have a good outline of what's gone wrong in the last few decades.
Look, strictly focusing on their overview of the issues, they certainly do well at diagnosing at least some of the problems plaguing us as a society. We have an unresponsive government regardless of who's in charge, and serious bureaucratic hurdles to overcome in regards to housing, climate change, and scientific research, among many other issues. True? True! On page 38 in the chapter Grow, when talking about the homelessness crisis, they state, quote, California has about 12% of the nation's population, 30% of the nation's homeless population, and about 50% of its unsheltered homeless population, unquote. They break down step by step how the cause of the homelessness isn't mental illness, drugs, or even the nice weather, but the zoning laws and NIMBYism, that's not in my backyard, for everybody out there, that grips California especially, preventing them from building the homes needed to house these people, and the relative inability of the homeless to leave for greener pastures. They note later on page 43, quote, many did exactly that, leave, of course, but some had nowhere to go. Others needed to stay near their families or jobs, unquote. This is an indictment of policies over people, which frankly is a nice change of pace from Tammy Bruce's book, Fear Itself, as we talked about last episode. Shameless plug. Please listen, like, and subscribe. Additionally, from page 141 in this chapter, Invent, they say, quote, at the highest levels, American science has become biased against the very thing that drives its progress, the art of taking bold risks. We have a problem of creaky institutions getting in the way of inventing, the MIT economist Pierre Azoulay said. It's not so different from housing or clean energy. American science has accumulated a set of processes and norms that favor those who know how to play the system rather than those who have the most interesting ideas, unquote. Now, I think that's true, and it's an indictment of our societal standards and ideals, or at least the de facto rather than the de jure ones. There's also this from page 173 in the chapter Deploy. And yes, we're going to be quoting a lot from this book.
Good.
Quote, Americans invented the world's first nuclear reactor and solar cell, but today we're well behind various European and Asian countries in deploying and developing those technologies, unquote. In other words, we as a country aren't doing anything anymore. We're just existing and siphoning up all the money and being a general pain in the ass to folks around the world. And look, I also have to acknowledge that they don't let the Democrats off the hook. Far from it. They are pretty scathing in their critiques, which is, again, more than I can say for Tammy regarding the Republicans. Again, episode 1. It's, in fact, noted in the introduction, specifically page 7, that, quote, Democrats, cowed by the Reagan Revolution and frightened of being seen as socialists, largely confined themselves to working on the demand side of the ledger. The notion that the U.S. government cannot solve America's problems was not unilaterally produced by Reagan and the GOP. It was co-produced by both parties and reinforced by their leaders, unquote. To which I say, correct! And that initially excites me about this book. Finally, There was going to be some self-awareness from liberals that could lead to needed and necessary reforms.
Yeah, they definitely don't let the Democrats off the hook. That's probably the biggest difference in approach I see between this and the approach on the right. Tammy Bruce was definitely more inclined to dismiss the problems on her side as essentially unimportant and mostly mistakes, whereas the left is evil and trying to kill you actively. It seems more realistic about the bipartisanship of the problem.
Yes, but similarly to Tammy, they aren't yet ready to break out of this binary political mindset and acknowledge the truly systemic changes that are needed, despite highlighting the truly systemic problems that are plaguing us. So remember that quote I gave earlier, especially that first bit regarding Democrats being frightened of being seen as socialists? I gathered that the two authors here are saying, on the down low, the left should not shy away from being seen as socialist, to which I say, yes, comrade. And in fact, I'd go further and to declare that they should embrace it. But they don't. Why? Why is that? And another example of these systemic problems you can take from this quote from page 105 in the chapter Govern. Quote, "We are used to understanding the battle lines of American politics as cleaving liberals who believe in a strong, active government from conservatives who doubt it. The truth is far more complicated. Liberals speak as if they believe in government and then pass policy after policy hamstringing what it can actually do. Conservatives talk as if they want a small state, but support a national security and surveillance apparatus of terrifying scope and power. Both sides are attached to the rhetoric of government that is routinely betrayed by their actions. The big government, small government divide is often more a matter of sentiment than substance," unquote. It almost sounds like a mono party.
The mono party.
Two sides of the same coin, not serving the populace, but rather the donors and oligarchs. Doesn't it? So, what do we do about it? That's the sound of nothing. At least from them. Here's another example on page 112 in the same chapter. Quote, "It is hard to hear Marston's story without being reminded of Nicholas Bagley's argument that liberalism has become obsessed with procedure rather than outcomes, that it seeks legitimacy through rule following rather than through the enactment of the public's will," unquote. Very true. It's performative, like they aren't a party of values. Part of the larger problem of the, say it with me now, mono party.
Mono party.
Again, Ezra, Derek, that's your cue to give us a path out of this. Any time now. Nothing. All of this is them dancing around the problem, refusing to accept solutions that are, in my opinion, a bit more creative and, frankly, radical.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'll be honest, the end of the book came out of nowhere for me. It feels like this is entirely a part one of what could have been a really great series, but without following with why and how, the what here feels quite empty.
I'll go a little further than that. The best way I can describe the process is phase 1, acknowledge the problem. Phase 2, question mark. Phase 3, grow, build, govern, invent, and deploy towards abundance and profit.
Hell yeah!
Also known as the Underpants Gnomes Gambit. That's a South Park reference to y'all who aren't attuned. Look it up. It's a great show. But anyway, that's it. It's such a letdown, and it leaves me perpetually exasperated, title drop, over where we are as a society. And it's especially exasperating with this quote from pages 214 and 215 in the conclusion, because Marx is referenced here. And finally, there is a positive reference to Marxism, Be Still My Beating Heart, and a legitimate critique of capitalism. Oh my God, is that legal? How is this not the focus of the book? Quote, Marx's aim was not to turn the production machine off, but to direct its ends toward a shared abundance, to unverse the forces of production and make possible that which has been impossible to imagine. There is much he got wrong, but one need not be a communist to see the wisdom in his analysis, unquote. Look, I would love to hear what they consider wrong. They never get into that, by the way, because it seems like the how of everything, the phase 2, it's right there. It's right there, guys.
Yeah, I mean, was there any advice in here at all? I mean, even Tammy Bruce told us to buy a gun.
And to just not be afraid. Simple, right? Also unhelpful, but at least it's advice.
Be unafraid.
And buy a gun. But from Abundance, the only advice I could glean that's geared towards us, the voters, the rank and file, is a sort of change of mindset. Maybe? Question mark? Even then, I'm not really fully sure. I guess maybe our mandate as the people is vote for different people who embrace the liberalism of the Cold War. Maybe. This is exemplified in page 2 of Deploy, where they note, quote, "The moon race is remembered today as a necessary and broadly popular response to the Soviet threat. But one of the most misunderstood aspects of the space race is that the Apollo program survived because of political persistence, not because of its popularity," unquote. And this is true, and it is a good point raised by Ezra and Derek. Not a lot of people remember how profoundly unpopular the whole space race thing was. But they take the wrong lesson from it on the next page. Quote, "One lesson of Apollo's surprising unpopularity is that the program was sustained by leaders within NASA and the White House, which never pulled the plug on an audacious task that polled poorly among the public," unquote. So they don't dive into the why of why the program was unpopular. Remember, at the time, the American people were going through the civil rights movement, through increasingly apparent inequality. The war on poverty becoming a thing later on is telling in that regard. And to better explain this, I found this article on Slate, which is titled "How Space Age Nostalgia Hobbles Our Future," written by Matt Novak on May 15th of 2012, where the following section states, quote, "Sheila Larkin of Brookhaven told the reporter that there were better uses for much of the money that goes into the space program. It's great that they can do it, but there is so much poverty in the country that the money could go other places." George Conway, a retired machinist, said that the trip was foolish and a waste of money that should be spent on the poor people in this country. Giles Jones said that it was important the U.S. would land there first, there being the moon, but offered reservations. "We're supposed to be the greatest country, and we can show that this way. But there are other good uses for much of the space program money," unquote. That sounds like something we would say today about a lot of programs, doesn't it? That was a long time ago. And this is the point. The science they were doing back during the space race wasn't for science's sake. It was in the name of fighting communism. Now, were the programs beneficial? Ultimately, sure. In some areas anyway. But they weren't meant to be beneficial to the public. They were meant to be beneficial in the fight against Soviet communism. Ezra and Derek are missing the point, and it is exasperating. And if they keep it up, perpetually.
Yeah, I think there might be some clues as to what their proposed solutions are, but I wonder if they're vague because they know that those propositions will likely be unpopular with a Democratic base.
Elaborate, please.
I mean, what do they keep pointing to as a problem? Regulatory bloat and bureaucracy.
Mm-hmm.
And what do they contrast it against? Low regulation authoritarian regimes that get shit done, like China.
Or MAGA.
It does seem to me a little bit like the one thread of commonality between this and Tammy's approach is a distrust of collective decision-making.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's fair to admit that it is a well-founded distrust as they've laid out. What their responses are to pushing through the regulations and legislative hurdles, though, it kind of strikes me as, and boy, the left doesn't want to hear this one, it sounds almost like blue MAGA.
Never say that again.
But it does. It does. And
you're not wrong.
And that's mildly concerning, to say the least. And yet, at the same time, it's understandable, isn't it? It speaks to, in my opinion, a deeply held belief throughout American society that government is at best unresponsive, and at worst, and probably more concerningly, no longer truly beholden to the American people. That's the voters, But what's the root cause of this? That's something that neither Ezra nor Derek really get into, and I suspect that's because they want to keep, ironically, despite what they're saying, pressing forward with the current system to solve these systemic problems. For instance, they note on page 173 of Deploy that, quote, "We are stuck between a progressive movement that is too afraid of growth and a conservative movement that is allergic to government intervention," unquote. Again, doing a lot of assumptions here, but I believe they are entrenched, like really entrenched in this neoliberal thinking, who think that old school liberalism, 1950s era liberalism, can save us all. I personally argue it's capitalism.
Capitalism.
It's a system that's been exploited to the fullest by those in power, and more specifically, those who are in power through copious amounts of the use of money to maintain that money and exploiting the rest of us and entrenching us in the present state of societal dysfunction. On page 179, they say, quote, "The election of Ronald Reagan in 1980, however, decimated the solar revolution in America, driven by a conservative ideology that," this is important, "favored free markets and limited government intervention. Reagan dismantled much of the solar infrastructure built up over the previous decade," unquote. I highlighted that because this is something that was embraced by the Democratic Party, headed by Bill Clinton onwards. That was the new left. The New Deal Democrats, done. Bye. We got the this new wave of Democrats that are more fiscally conservative for some reason, and it's neoliberalism with conservative politics doing that, but more. The system, as created, emphasizes the free market above all else, limiting government intervention as much as possible in favor of private interests. How are they not getting this? Or later, in pages 183 and 184, quote, "Government should have a vision of the future, and within that vision, it can create space for companies to do what they otherwise cannot, to make possible what is otherwise impossible," unquote. Yes, sure, fine, that sounds good. How? The system of our society demands that our vision be focused first and foremost on profit, on acquisition of capital at all costs, not the betterment of society, or especially of the most disadvantaged. How are you all not seeing this? Who is benefiting from this dysfunction? It isn't the voters, regardless of their political orientation. You can't put this on the MAGA voters. It's the oligarchs who keep siphoning funds away from public goods and towards their bank accounts. And to an extent, all of us recognize this, but we can't break out of this mindset of the system itself. And that's a problem. Ezra and Derek come close, so close, but they don't delve deeper than their dislike of this bureaucracy, because then it would force them to start questioning these really deeply held convictions about how a government is supposed to run and how a society is supposed to function. This right here is the hurdle that liberals struggle to get over and take the next step towards socialism, and so on.
So it's not so much that they don't have any ideas, than that they're aware of what their ideas are but can't say them without heavy qualification.
Possibly. Now, were you to ask that directly to them, I expect they'll say something similar to what they wrote in the conclusion on pages 215 and 216. Quote, "We considered calling this book the Abundance Agenda. We could have easily filled these pages with a long list of policy ideas to ease the blockages we fear," unquote. But as they provided potential examples, they continued, quote, "This is where the shortcomings of a list of policy proposals become clear. It is easy to unfurl a policy wish list. But what is ultimately at stake here are our values. How do we weigh the role that the current inhabitants of a community should have in who enters that community next? How do we balance the interests of a town against the interests of a country, unquote? Now, eventually they concluded, quote, what we are proposing is less a set of policy solutions than a new set of questions around which our politics should revolve. What is scarce that should be abundant? What is difficult to build that should be easy? What inventions do we need that we do not yet have? Unquote. Charitably. I interpret this as them saying, we could do that, but we just want to do the first step, identify the problems, and the third step, propose the goals that come from fixing those problems. It's up to you all to figure out the next step, fixing the problems. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy to fix those problems, far from it, but I can't help but feel it's a bit of a cop-out, that they just want the attention of this revelatory idea in a book, which seems to be, let's just bring about abundance, without doing the truly challenging task of laying out a roadmap for us. Now, is laying this roadmap out realistic, especially in one very easily accessible book? I don't know for certain. Would have been nice for them to at least attempt it. And all of this, I repeat, is the charitable interpretation. I could also say that you're right. They know the answer is to tell both the Republican Party and Democratic Party to fuck off. And that the answer is to create a Labor Party of some kind to unify Americans behind these ideas of building more houses, building infrastructure that allows us to thrive in the 21st century, funding research, and promoting inventions that helps us, the people, rather than the elite. But they don't want to do that for reasons known only to them. Maybe they're too much of insiders in the Democratic Party to bring themselves to that. That this calling out of the Democratic Party is their version of radicalism. And look, to be clear, it is an important first step, but it's not the last step. And at the end of the day, perhaps that's what I would want us to take away from this book, and not just us, but everybody reading it and or listening to us talk about it. It's not enough to point out the very real flaws and sketch a utopian post-scarcity future, communist term, by the way. The real hard work is in acknowledging unabashedly and unashamedly that we have systemic flaws that run so deep we need to consider it impossible to solely work within a binary political system that currently only serves the interests of the elite, and to consider, maybe, other options that are heretical and blasphemous in American parlance. Socialism, Marxism, labor, class. It took you and I a painfully long time to reach this conclusion. And it's time, I think, to bring everyone else to this conclusion as well, through being perpetually exasperated as to the seeming uselessness of it all, to the point where we finally decide to do something about it. Not just write books like they did and talk on podcasts like we're doing, but to actually put the work in to change how we approach American politics and American society going forward.
Okay, let me cut. Blah, blah. There we go.
Blah.
Right, we're good. So what did you actually think of the book? Like, just reading it, if you had read it without doing what we're doing here, what would you have told somebody else about it if they asked?
It depends on when you would have asked me. If you had asked me, say, prior to 2016, I probably would have been perfectly fine with this book. I would have actually really liked this book because I would have been able to say, look, they are going after their own party for their own failings, and they're trying to make it better. What they're saying is pretty authoritative. It makes sense. Good idea. Yeah, let's do that. post 2016, but prior to, say, 2020, probably the same thing, though a little bit more skepticism on, okay, but how are you going to do all of these things? And definitely post 2020, post Biden administration, I really would have just said to people that they do a good job of laying out why certain aspects of things suck. They did a great job with the housing thing, for instance, where they're really nailing down it's not the mental health thing, it's not the what was it, the nice weather, it's not the fact that it's a liberal city, it's the zoning laws.
It's housing supply. It's just there are not enough houses for the humans who live here.
And they're very understanding of why we got to where we are. Like, it wasn't a deliberate attempt on the part of most of these laws to create a housing crisis and a homelessness crisis. It made sense for the time in a lot of these instances, but a lot of it can come down to NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. I don't want these homeless people here. They can go somewhere else, but they can't go anywhere else. So what do? So it's a good question. It's really hard to separate the focused effort of what I'm doing here with you, which is trying to really get into the whys of this book. But I think if I had just randomly picked up this book even now, I would have felt like it was a good start, but it still fell short because I have to keep coming back to there's no how except change the mindset and vote for people who are willing to bulldoze their way through all of these rules and regulations in the government. And sure, that may have worked for people who still believe in the system that we got, but what about for the people who don't believe in the system? There's nothing here for them.
Yeah, and I feel like the big difference between this approach and the quote-unquote approach on the right, which is Tammy Bruce, is that this approach, at the very least, is there's something wrong with the system. Right. Now, they're not really willing to say that we should take it and put it in a wood chipper. They're like, oh, well, just give it a pat on the head and give it some candy and maybe it'll get better. But Tammy is like, she doesn't actually, I mean, yes, she acknowledges that the system is broken, but she really thinks that the problem is the people who broke the system. That, yeah, they broke the system, but they didn't just break it by accident. They broke it because they are evil, blood-drinking Marxist parasites. And, like, even if that were true, even if that were the case, that the reason that the government is messed up is because the leaders who built it this way were evil, blood-drinking parasites. The reality is, knowing that and being angry at them and even walking to their houses and cutting off their heads wouldn't fix the system. Every person who built the system this way, who was evil according to Tammy, could be executed summarily tomorrow, and the system that keeps us poor and keeps the rich in power would still exist. And that's what bugs me the most.
Yeah, and I think that comes from something that I alluded to earlier, is this inability to get out of the mindset of a two-party system. It's very difficult for a lot of people to think about America as something other than what it is right now. And I'm not saying that's because we're dumb. No, we're saying that because this is what we grew up with. This is what we were taught from day one, that this is the system we've built up over hundreds of years. It has made us the greatest country on earth. Why would you do anything radical to this system that could potentially lead to disaster? Like, if you do something horrifyingly wrong, but with the best intentions, it still results in horrifying conclusions. And that's a feeling that I had prior to 2020, definitely prior to 2016, where even though I was going in as a Bernie supporter, both 2016 and 2020, I felt like Bernie was about as far as we should go in regards to what we do to the system. We enact lots of change, but it's around the edges of the system rather than getting into the heart of the system, why we are where we are. And that's a really, really difficult hurdle to overcome because it requires you to acknowledge that years, decades of what you were taught is at worst wrong, at best misguided or ill-informed. And the idea of us doing something completely different, of us having an economic system, let alone a political system, but an economic system that is vastly different to what we're doing right now is scary. It is really scary to think that if we do something different, it could lead to the end of the United States as we know it. I understand that, totally get it. But I think that the reason why I'm at this stage, why I suspect you are at this stage, and why I'm hoping, and hoping is not the right term, it's more thinking that there's more and more people arriving at this stage, is that we're already reaching a mindset where we don't believe in the current state of things anymore. We don't think that it's sustainable. It's not going to be helping us anymore. We have to do something different, even if it's the unknown. And boy, we have a fear of the unknown. We have to go for it anyway, because we definitely have a growing fear of what is known. And what is known is that the inequality is getting worse. Our voices are mattering less and less. The rich are getting richer, and they are entrenching themselves further in our government, and they keep us focused on cultural issues and on things that focus the anger on each other rather than them. And it's so frustrating to see that now that I'm in this current mindset, but I'm hoping that we're reaching a point where enough of us in society are also beginning to see that and can decide organically, we gotta try something different.
Yeah, it seems like both Tammy and Ezra and Derek are people who are trying to describe the problems with a system that they fundamentally don't actually have that many personal issues with. Like, Tammy Bruce complains a lot, but her life seems to be exactly what she wants. She was a Fox News pundit, a very, very popular one, and now she works for the White House in communications. And both Ezra and Derek work for big-name, long-standing liberal publications, and there's not really any reason for them to look at the system and connect personally with the way that it's hurting people. They'll see other people, they'll see their friends, they'll see their families, they'll see people online who are being hurt by the system. But when it comes down to it, they look at themselves, they look at their families, they look at their spouses, they look at their kids, and they say, well, yeah, I want to change it so other people are doing good, but I don't want to change it so much that what I'm experiencing changes. And it's just hard for me to take advice from anyone whose perspective is that, especially when it's so transparently that.
Yeah, and that's part of why I think we're starting to reach this point in a lot of society where we're reaching a point economically where we're not experiencing any mobility anymore. And because we're not experiencing that social and economic mobility, we're feeling more and more desperate to not even like succeed. We're just getting more and more focused on survival at this stage. And right now, a lot of us feel kind of trapped, I think, in this sort of rat race. And recently, I think I actually saw this in the book where it was pointed out that housing prices have reached levels that are simply unattainable, yet consumer goods have reached prices that are more attainable than ever. And I thought, oh my God, I just came to that same exact conclusion not too long ago. And That's
They want to make sure that you can still afford the stuff that you need to keep buying, but that you can never afford the shit that you only buy once.
That's kind of insane, isn't it? Like, this is... Can't you argue that this is kind of sort of their version of bread and circuses?
Yes! That's exactly what it is. More like just circuses and also circuses, because we can't really afford bread right now.
Oh, yeah, because, again, eggs are $8. I saw it earlier this week. I went to a Ralph's, and lo and behold, there it is, a pack of, 24 eggs for $8, $7.99 to be exact.
That's still way too much.
That's still way too much for eggs, man. And rent prices here in Los Angeles, in certain parts of Los Angeles, for a single bedroom are somewhere around $2,000 a month.
Yeah, I think even for multifamily homes, the price per bedroom on average is $1,700 or something.
That's kind of insane, man, especially considering most of the jobs nowadays. And this is before hiring freezes throughout parts of the city of Los Angeles up to and including the city of Glendale itself. Are making it more challenging for us to find good jobs to begin with. How are we affording all of this?
Debt.
Yeah, but okay, how much debt are we talking about here? How much debt do people actually have?
Well, speaking of, and more importantly, to whom is it owed? Because we talk a lot about the national debt, right? And we think of the national debt the way that an average person would think of a debt to a bank. Right. I owe money to somebody else.
Right.
But who's the largest holder of U.S. Treasury bonds?
Who's that?
United States citizens and companies.
What the fuck?
We borrow money from ourselves. The next largest holder is China, but I think they hold less than 15%.
Yeah, they're almost irrelevant in all of this. Even though they're the scapegoat in all of this, whenever we're having the fucking debt ceiling discussions that inevitably lead to an almost shutdown by the government, and it's framed as sort of this apocalyptic thing, and especially when a Democrat is in the White House, oh my God, this means that China is gonna take all of our shit.
Light us on fire.
And light us on fire in the process. But they only own 15%?
Yes, so... What's important to remember is when we're talking about the debt now being the second largest expense after defense, what that actually means is that our second largest expense after the debt is paying out interest to our own domestic wealthy borrowers.
Oh my God.
That's what that means.
Oh my God, it's worse than I thought.
The debt is not to the world, it's to our own oligarchs.
How fucked are we with the debt?
Honestly, my guess is less than we imagine because the debt can be restructured because we own most of it.
Sure. Okay.
In a longer term sense, we need to figure out how to provide healthcare for our elderly population without borrowing hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right, but weren't we also thinking of abolishing and or privatizing Social Security?
Well, we probably shouldn't do that.
No, probably not. No, but that seems to be the trend with the current government, isn't it?
But this is the trend, not just with the government, but in politics in general, right? And we can see this with the contrast between these two books that seem different. But the one thing that they do have in common is a distancing away from the notion of economic regulation. Neither one of these groups likes the idea of the government regulating the economy.
Why is that?
Honestly, because the first way you regulate economy is effectively and fairly taxing income. That is the leading edge of economic relation. Mm-hmm. And that is what they don't want.
No.
Because the reason we need to borrow hundreds of billions of dollars to keep care of our elderly population is because we are not taking that money in tax. We wouldn't need to borrow that money if we just took it from them in tax, and we wouldn't need to pay them interest on it either.
And also, if we took all that money from them on tax, we could also not just fund the healthcare for the elderly, but fund healthcare for the young, and also fund education for the young so that they can be properly educated and able to enter the workforce as not just... I hesitate. No, I don't hesitate. Slave labor.
Yeah, 100%.
And all of this, there's no seeming investment in a long-term future here.
No, the long-term future is just for those people to whom we owe that interest.
So, yeah, there's so, like, with Tammy's book, you could easily swap out the left or the Marxists or all of those buzzwords from Fox News and put in oligarchs, and honestly, not too far off.
No, pretty much verbatim it would apply in almost every circumstance except for her very specific, bespoke examples about Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do about that one. But
nothing anybody can do about Rush, since thank God he's dead.
But we'll cut that from the podcast.
Yeah, I'm not going to put all of this in. This is extemporaneous, and I hate Rush Limbaugh.
But Tammy is more focused on pointing the blame at a specific group of people that for our purposes you could easily swap in the oligarchs. But she doesn't go into the economic problems that are facing us and are making us super, super exasperated right now. Whereas Ezra and Derek do go into the reasons why everything kind of sucks. And they go into, this is what we should be able to do. We should have a system where we don't have to worry about education. We don't have to worry about healthcare. We don't have to worry about energy. We don't have to worry about the environment. We don't have to worry about all of these things because we have so much stuff here.
So many, Abund.
So many to... Hey, what did I tell you?
Oh, no. Okay, I'll take myself out.
Continuing. Yes, to use your phrase, God damn it, we have so much Abund that we should be able to do this, but we don't. Why is that? And it's apparently bureaucratic obstructionism?
Yes, that's what worries me, is that, so, I think it was Peter Thiel, who was the first one to, like, publicly come out and say democracy is not working.
Right, yeah, I remember that.
And the reality is, I agree with him in the sense that I don't think that American democracy in its current form is working effectively for its voters or its people.
Qualified in that particular sentence, sure.
Exactly. But then, not just from Peter, but also apparently from both Tammy Bruce as the right and from Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson as the left, their solution is, so just fuck democracy. Just, find the right genius authoritarian to lead you into the future like God. And somehow just ignoring the fact that over the last 50 to 80 years, we have seen intentional erosion of democratic power for the average voter in favor of increasing political power for those with money. As though that's not what ruined our fucking system.
Again, like, to be perfectly fair and balanced, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you are fair and balanced. I'm a bitch.
No, I mean fair and balanced in the sense that I'm totally stealing from some more news here.
Oh, fair enough.
But
I don't mind being a bitch, that's my job.
No, okay, but, like, to be semi-fair to Ezra and Derek, again, they're going to claim that this is more about changing a mindset that we have. We being apparently American society. And, look, I guess we can approach what they say we need to change the mindset of American society in the same way that you can approach what Peter Thiel said about democracy as it currently is working is not working. Very specifically, I will be able to say, yes, Ezra and Derek, I agree with you that the current mindset of the American populace and especially the American voters needs to change. The thing is, though, in my opinion, it needs to change away from this binary political system, and it needs to change away from this notion that capitalism will solve our problems.
Yes, that free markets are an omni-tool.
Yeah, and that even the notion that government can do some things well. Markets can do other things well. Sure, fine, that's a step in the right direction, but it still is predicated on this core notion that the free market must be preserved at all costs. To whatever extent, ranging from a mixed economy to a full-fledged libertarian wet dream.
The Wild West, where everyone got shot and died of tetanus at 22.
Which is where we're going, by the way.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
clearly.
And yet, it's interesting that just recently, and we can cut this from the pod, but
that's fine.
Just recently, I noticed that there was a tweet from Chase Oliver, the libertarian candidate for the presidency last time, standing with the protesters in Los Angeles.
Whoa.
Yeah, no, he just...
I mean, that kind of makes sense. It doesn't make sense that libertarian would be like, you sent the army to fucking where?
Yeah, so, like, look, on the social issues, fine. I got no problems with the libertarians joining us. I prefer to not talk anything economic with them ever because I refuse to speak of Atlas Shrugged.
Ron Paul 2012.
I'm against book burning on principle.
Well, I think as long as you just burn one book to make a point and not every version of the book, then it's not immoral.
Look, I will only go so far as to say I will happen to leave the book on a flat surface. This flat surface may or may not be flammable. I may or may not leave some kind of thing that may or may not set this flammable surface alight. I won't know because I won't see it because I will be turning the other way.
Yeah, it's a mystery liquid. Who knows if it's an accelerant?
I don't know, and I didn't smell anything because I'm out of the premises as well. I didn't know that a book was burned.
Got that plausible deniability.
All I'll say is that if Atlas Shrugged was that book, I would not be noticing it. If there were a few other books, I would notice, but Atlas Shrugged, I wouldn't notice. Not the point, doesn't matter.
And now for the section we like to call our denouement. So, first question, who is this book for?
It's for the grumpy and frustrated Democrats who want to feel like they can do something without actually doing anything. It's for folk who want to replicate MAGA, but with the Blue Party. Blue MAGA for short. They don't want to admit it necessarily, but that's kind of the vibe that I got from this book.
Ugh. Second question, who wrote this book?
Well, Ezra Klein is an opinion columnist and host of the award-winning Ezra Show podcast at the New York Times. He is the author of Why We're Polarized, named one of Barack Obama's top books of 2022. He is also on Pod Save America a lot. Derek Thompson is a staff writer at The Atlantic and the host of the podcast Plain English. He's also the author of Hitmakers and On Work, an anthology of his writing on labor and technology. This is all from the Simon & Schuster website, by the way.
Third question, why was this book written?
I'm not exactly sure. I guess it was to provide some kind of a response to the recent election. Maybe something to make the Democrat voters feel like they're doing some serious soul searching. It's really difficult to put into words what the point of this book is beyond abundance. Be abundance.
And the last question, should you read this book?
It depends. Now, do you want to have some nifty facts and figures? I can't believe I used nifty to describe this, but we're rolling with it. As to why everything with housing, green energy, invention, and science, especially when it relates to California, kind of sucks. This book actually does a great job of laying it all out for us, and that was kind of nice. Granted, we had a pretty trashy book beforehand, so, anything was better than that. But do you want a better idea of where to go and what to do from here? Look, if you want anything aside from being abundance-pilled, I swear to fucking God, don't even bother. Just don't bother.
Steer clear.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Perpetually Exasperated. If today's conversation got you thinking a little bit deeper and a little more exasperated about everything, we want to hear from you. Give us a like, leave a review, share the show. Please send your feedback, thoughts, or questions you'd like us to answer in your comments.
Next time, we'll be reading and talking about Owned, how tech billionaires on the right bother the loudest voices on the left, described by Amazon as a devastating examination of how a cabal of tech billionaires is colluding with once idealistic journalists to create an entirely new media landscape.
Until then, be critical, be skeptical, and remember, it's okay to be exasperated and to think outside the binary political spectrum presented to us. Stay safe, friends.